Good evening and welcome to episode 97 of Mystery, Murder, and Mayhem. On tonight's episode, I'm bringing you the story of another murder that happened somewhat locally to me. I honestly don't know why it's taken me until the third season to talk about him, but the other night I was thinking about all the murderers that I've talked about on the podcast, and it dawned on me that there was one that I hadn't talked about yet. And that one is Todd Kohlhepp. Before we get started, I just want to mention that Spotify has started offering subscriptions for podcasts, and the big benefit is that you'll hear the podcast absolutely ad-free. So for like 99 cents, and that price is going to vary from podcast to podcast, but I didn't want like y'all paying an arm and a leg, but for 99 cents a month for Mystery, Murder, and Mayhem, you can listen with 0 ads. Now the link to subscribe is in the episode description, and if you want to check it out, follow that link. All right, so let's get started with this episode. Now, at the time of some of Kohlhepp's crimes, I actually lived not very far from some of the property that he owned. And I'm going to talk about that property in just a few minutes. And before I go on, again, I want to apologize for some short episodes that I've done lately. As I said on one of the previous episodes, my son Nick and I have been sick with the sinus infections, and he even developed a mild case of pneumonia. So I've had a very sore throat that's finally getting better, but up until now, I haven't really felt like recording anything lengthy. So Todd Kohlhepp's story starts when he was born on March the 7th, 1971. And one weird thing that I'd like to mention is that it was actually the date of this year, which is his birthday, that I realized I haven't talked about him yet. Kind of gave me chills, but maybe that was just the universe way of saying, hey, Andrea, you haven't talked about this one yet. And it's his birthday. But anyway, he was born in Florida, and he was raised in Georgia and South Carolina. And when he was only 2 years old, his parents divorced. The year following his parents' divorce, his mom gained custody of him, and she married another man. And sometime during the following years, Kohlhepp's behavior became noticeably odd. Now, as young as nursery school, y'all, he was described as a troublesome child, and he was actually aggressive towards other little kids there at the daycare. Sometimes he would even destroy things like their toys that belonged to these other kids. And he also started being cruel to animals, because he once shot a dog with a BB gun, and he killed a goldfish by pouring bleach into its water. By the time he was 9 years old, he was going to counseling. And his counselors described him as being explosive and preoccupied with sexual content at 9 years old. It was also found out during those counseling sessions that he had an unhealthy relationship with his stepfather, and he wanted to live with his bio dad, even though he hadn't even seen him for around 8 years. And he eventually ended up spending 3.5 months in a Georgia psychiatric hospital because he was unable to get along with other children. Well, around the time that he was 12, he was finally sent to live with his dad in Arizona. His father was an avid collector of weapons, and shortly after moving in with his dad, Todd took up that hobby also. While living with his dad, he was taught by his dad how to blow things up and how to make bombs. And it seemed like Todd was bonding with his dad, although it was over not what you would consider normal father-son activities. But soon that relationship would fall apart. Todd's dad spent a lot of time away from him, and he chose to spend his time with a string of girlfriends. Because of this, Kohlhepp, he wanted to return home to his mom, but instead of welcoming her son home with open arms, she would just come up with excuses to keep him in Arizona with his father. And at that point, things took a very sharp turn for the worse. On November 25th, 1986, when Kohlhepp was only 15 years old, he kidnapped a 14-year-old girl in Tempe, Arizona. Kohlhepp threatened her with a .22 caliber pistol and forced her to his home, or back into his home, where he restrained her. He taped her mouth shut, and he sexually assaulted her. And when he was finished with her, he walked her home, and before leaving her, he threatened to kill her siblings if she told anybody about what he had done to her. Well, apparently later somebody found out because he was arrested for those crimes. And in 1987, he pleaded guilty to the kidnapping charges. So the other charges ended up being dropped, and he was sentenced to 15 years, and he had to register as a sex offender. Well, while he was doing his time in jail, he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and he was shown to have an IQ of 118. The judge in that case wrote that Kohlhepp was behaviorally and emotionally dangerous and more than likely couldn't be rehabilitated. Later, his probation officer would say the same, and he wrote that Kohlhepp, quote, felt the world owed him something, end quote. But his defense attorney felt otherwise, saying that while he was defending him, quote, he did not believe his client would go on to hurt others, end quote. But y'all, that defense attorney was so very wrong. If that defense attorney's assessment of Todd Kohlhepp had been correct, I wouldn't be talking about him right now. Well, after serving 14 years of that kidnapping charge, Kohlhepp was released in August of 2001, and he returned to South Carolina because his mom was still living here. While he had been in prison, he had attended and graduated from Central Arizona College with a bachelor's degree in computer science. So when he got back to South Carolina, he put his newly learned skills to work. From January of 2002 to November 2003, he found work at a graphic design firm in Spartanburg. But soon he decided to go back to school, and this time he went to Greenville Technical College and then transferred to the University of South Carolina Upstate. And in 2008, he graduated from there with a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration Marketing. So y'all, he wasn't a dumb guy by any means. Well, remember how I said he had to register as a sex offender back when he kidnapped the young girl in Arizona? Well, despite that, he was able to get his real estate license in 2006 because he lied about having a felony on his application. It just seems to me that they would have done a background check no matter what he had said on the application, but I guess they didn't. After getting his real estate license, he opened his own business, and that business employed dozens of agents. He was a superstar when it came to real estate. And at one point, he was recognized as a top-selling agent in the Carolina region. It sounded like he was turning his life around, even though he had lied on that application. During this time, he also got his private pilot license and began to purchase property for himself, including some in other states. One of those pieces of properties was one that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the one that I lived pretty close to. And this was back during that time. I don't live close to it now. Now, it was nearly 100-acre tract of land just 9 miles out of the community, or 9 miles outside of the community of Moore, South Carolina. And not long after he made that purchase, he had the entire property fenced in. And again, we're going to talk about that property in just a few minutes. Now, many of Kohlhepp's clients felt that he was this really nice guy. And one woman who sold him a house described him as being extremely outgoing, and he was professional. But she also mentioned that he would sometimes talk about his firearms collection and would sometimes sneak in these little sexual implications into their conversations. But then there were others who had nothing nice at all to say about him. There was a lady who was an assistant to one of Kohlhepp's employees, and she described Kohlhepp as being an angry man, and he was condescending to many of his employees. And there was a banker that often worked with him that said Kohlhepp watched porn often, even when he was at work. Now, outside of work, he had traits that disturbed others too. And he would frequent a local Waffle House, and his behavior there was so disturbing that soon a male cook at the restaurant would take his order so that the female waitstaff didn't have to interact with him. But other than that, there's nothing that would be going on that would make, or nothing in his behavior would make anybody think that there was anything sinister going on. But let's fast forward to August of 2016. And on the night of August 29th, 2016, a young woman named Calla Brown and her boyfriend Charlie Carver had dinner with a close friend at their apartment just outside of Anderson, South Carolina. After that dinner, several friends had heard from her over the following day, but by August the 31st, all had gone silent from the couple. Now, Charlie Carver's mom knew something was wrong when she hadn't heard from him, because she said that they didn't go a day without some type of communication. And after a couple of days, Carver's mom talked to the management at that apartment complex that he and Calla lived at and asked him to check on them. But when management knocked on the door, there was no answer. And by all appearances, it looked as if nobody had been there for a while. Perhaps the most disturbing element of the abandoned apartment was that Calla's little dog had been left behind with no food or water. And her mom knew that something had to be seriously wrong, because there was no way in the world that she would have left that little dog behind, and certainly wouldn't have left him behind without food or water. Well, weeks later, strange posts started popping up on Charlie's Facebook account. Things were posted that said stuff like they had left on their own, and they were fine. And both Brown's and Carver's families, they knew that his account had to have been hacked. And other than that, there wasn't much to go on, but no one believed that they had left on their own. Well, 2 months passed, and local authorities received a tip that Brown and Carver were supposed to have done some work on Kohlhepp's property on the day that they disappeared. So they obtained a search warrant and went to that property near Moore, South Carolina, to conduct a search. While they were there, they heard this really loud banging and screaming coming from inside a metal shipping container. And that what I'm talking about is those containers like you see on the big ships coming into port. It's those big metal, almost looks like the trailer part of a tractor trailer truck. But so the investigators, anyway, they heard her banging or somebody banging and screaming inside one of those containers, and the investigators went to check it out. And when they got it open, they found Calla Brown inside. She had been restrained with chains and a lock around her neck. They actually had to use a bolt cutter to set her free. And they asked her if they knew where her friend was, to which she replied with the quote, "Charlie." And then she told them that he had been shot. And she went on to say, quote, "Todd Kohlhepp shot Charlie Carver 3 times in the chest. He wrapped him in a blue tarp, put him in the bucket of the tractor, and locked me down here. I've never seen him again." End quote. While she was held captive, she was repeatedly raped and intimidated into not trying to escape by being shown the graves of Kohlhepp's other victims. Yes, I said other victims. Now, shortly after Calla was freed, Kohlhepp was arrested, and Charlie's body was later found on the property. And that wouldn't be all that was discovered in this bizarre case. On November the 4th, heavy equipment was brought into the property along with cadaver dogs. And around 10 a.m. that morning, Charlie Carver's body was discovered. The following day, while Kohlhepp is sitting there in police custody, he starts admitting to other crimes that took place almost 13 years ago to the day prior to the murder of Charlie Carver. And that crime had been one of the most talked about unsolved crimes in South Carolina's history. On the morning of November the 6th, 2003, a customer walked into a motorcycle dealership called Superbike Motorsports, and it was located in Chesney, South Carolina. And that person found 4 people shot to death. And it was just the oddest thing because nothing had been stolen. I mean, there was even an envelope of cash laying out in plain sight. And those found dead were 30-year-old Scott Ponder, his mom 52-year-old Beverly Guy, 26-year-old Chris Sherbert, who was the shop mechanic, and the service manager, 30-year-old Brian Lucas. And he and Scott Ponder had also been best of friends over the years. Well, for years after that crime, police searched for clues into who had walked into a successful bike shop and murdered 4 people. But any lead that was presented to them led to dead ends. And at one time, they had even suspected Scott's wife of being involved, but eventually she was ruled out. And it just really seemed like this case was never going to be solved. So when Todd Kohlhepp started confessing to the Superbike murders, authorities were stunned, to say the least. And it was clear that Todd Kohlhepp wasn't just a murderer, but he was a serial killer. But why had Kohlhepp killed the folks in that shop, or really anybody for that matter? Well, Kohlhepp told authorities that he had tried to return a bike that he had purchased from that shop, and he said that he was given a hard time, and at some point he felt that the people were mocking him, and he decided to take revenge. And that's what Kohlhepp said happened. And since there's no living witnesses to dispute or, agree with it, that's all there was to go on. During further investigation, detectives also found reviews that Kohlhepp had left for shovels, padlocks, tasers, and gun accessories on Amazon. And the review for that padlock read, quote, solid locks, have 5 on a shipping container. Won't stop them, but sure will slow them down until they are too old to care, end quote. And a review on a folding shovel read, quote, keep in car for when you have to hide bodies and you left the full-size shovel at home. Does not come with a midget, which would have been nice, end quote. I'm thinking either that midget was, where he said midget was a typo, or I'm not sure what he meant by that. But anyway, this man really left those reviews, though. And there were a couple of other reviews, and I'm going to have the screenshots of those on my social media pages, so be sure to head over there and check those out. And he used the screen name of me, but wish lists that he had on the Amazon website were linked under that name, me. It was linked to the name Todd Kohlhepp. Well, shortly after his arrest, Kohlhepp's mother visited him in prison, and he confessed to her that there were many other victims that he hadn't even mentioned, and when she asked him how many, he replied with, quote, you do not have enough fingers, end quote. Now, as far as the other 2 bodies that were found on Kohlhepp's property, they were identified as a married couple named Johnny Joe and Megan McCraw Coxey. And they were reported missing in December of 2015. It was about the middle of that December, and that was in Spartanburg County. Now, both of them had just been released from jail, and Megan had asked her mom to bail her out because she said that she had a job lined up. Well, after she was unable to reach Megan after several attempts, the mom of Megan, she reported her missing. Now, her body, along with her husband's, were found buried not too far from the shipping container that Calla had been found in. Kohlhepp had led authorities to their graves when the authorities took him back to the property. And it is believed that Kohlhepp lured the Coxies to his property in the same way that he had lured Brown and Carver there. Now, in all, Kohlhepp has been linked to 7 murders, and Kohlhepp claims that his victims were criminals and that he was actually trying to save Calla Brown. He claimed all of this in a letter that he wrote to the New York Post, and he also claimed in that same letter that Brown had never been sexually assaulted. And he went on to say, quote, "She was in the shipping container because I didn't want to hurt her, refused to turn her over to someone who would, and was buying time while I figured out a way to resolve this non-violently," end quote. And he has also at some point during all this admitted that he tried to keep Megan Coxey alive, but he killed her after she tried setting the shipping container on fire after he had given her cigarettes. Now, in the end, Kohlhepp was charged with 4 counts of murder for the Superbike murders and 1 count of kidnapping for Calla Brown's abduction. Later, he was also charged with an additional 3 charges of murder in the counts of the Coxies and Charlie Carver, plus 1 count of kidnapping and 3 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. In addition to these charges, relatives of the Superbike murder victims, they also filed a wrongful, gosh, I'm like tongue-tied today, but they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him, as well as Calla Brown. She also filed her own separate civil lawsuit against him. And on May the 26th of 2017, Kohlhepp pleaded guilty to all 7 counts of murder, the 2 counts of kidnapping charges, and 1 count of criminal sexual conduct or criminal sexual assault. And from that, he was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. And he had taken a plea bargain that helped him escape the death penalty. And he's currently serving his life sentence at Lieber Correctional Institution, which is in Ridgeville, South Carolina. Now, I just want to say that here in South Carolina, we like to think that we're pretty safe. And for the most part, we are. But then there's people like Todd Kohlhepp and Alex Murdoch, Pee Wee Gaskins, and even Susan Smith, who prove that anything can happen in our southern paradise at any time. I mean, like I said, I only lived a few miles from where his property was that he had Calla Brown and had buried those bodies. And, of course, we didn't know that was going on at the time until the news broke that all those bodies had been found and Calla had been found in that shipping container. But just to think that that was going on just a few miles down the road is just blood chilling. I mean, to know that's that close to you. But maybe it's a good thing we didn't know anything was going on until it was all over with and he was in custody. But there's just really no telling what else is going on out there that we don't know about. Not saying that to scare y'all, but you never know. Well, y'all, that's all I have for tonight's episode. And I hope that the rest of your week is just simply amazing. And don't forget to come back again next week for an all-new episode. And keep your eyes open for any breaking news that I may bring y'all. Have a good night.